Hello, welcome to Book Journey. Many of you have probably heard or read quite a few books on the grand history of humanity, such as Yuval Noah Harari's Sapiens, A Brief History of Humankind, and Jared Diamond's Guns, Germs, and Steel, so you might wonder, why another one? However, the book we're discussing today, The Dawn of Everything, A New History of Humanity, is genuinely different from other grand history books. Its novelty is not in terms of time, but, as the subtitle suggests, it is an attempt to rewrite the destiny of humanity. The new aspects are not only in the materials, but also in the perspectives, as it tries to subvert the way we think about human history and challenge the viewpoints we are familiar with and even consider as established conclusions. It is no exaggeration to say that this book can be seen as punching Harari and kicking Diamond, arguing that they have oversimplified the interesting and diverse human history, cutting off the branches and leaving only a bare tree trunk. The book points out that the well-known stories in those popular grand history bestsellers, such as how Homo sapiens dominated the world, the emergence of civilization, and the establishment of early states, are all linear historical narratives, originating from modern invented origin myths, ignoring too many historical facts. The book's interpretation of human history is not about what we have gained in our long development process, but rather what we have lost along the way. To understand this, we must pick up the branches that were cut off, such as the indigenous societies in the Americas, cited extensively in this book, to re-recognize the possibilities that humans originally possessed. Of course, the authors of this book also affirm that social theory needs to simplify complexity. We often need to reduce the complex historical landscape to a simple sketch to discover a clear pattern, which is not a problem in itself. However, the book also proposes that people must simplify the world to discover new knowledge about it. But the problem is that for a long time after the discovery, people continue to simplify. In other words, after the sages of past generations have simplified for us and discovered new knowledge from the sketch of human history, and when that new knowledge has become common sense today, humanity should actually try to do more detailed fine brushwork, opening up our imagination about the world. It can be said that while the past used a wide-angle lens to capture the panorama of human history, this book will use an 8K level lens to look again, finding the devil hidden in the details. Why does this book have such a grand vision? It depends on the authors of the book. The book has two authors. One is the late anthropologist David Graeber, and the other is archaeologist David Wengrow. They have had countless conversations and joint research on early human history over nearly a decade, culminating in this book. Graeber was not only an anthropologist but also a famous social activist. He was a leading figure in the Occupy Wall Street movement, and his book Bullshit Jobs has sparked more and more discussions over the years. This book is considered his last work, completed just 3 weeks before his death. Graeber was very good at discovering the dilemmas of contemporary society, while the other author, Wengrow, was more adept at finding human possibilities from an archaeological perspective. Wengrow is a professor of comparative archaeology at University College London and has conducted archaeological excavations in many places in Africa and the Middle East, being more familiar with archaeological materials. The two authors cited extensively in the writing of this book, using new research from multiple disciplines, and proposed many inspiring new ideas. Moreover, this book is not only a critique of past historical narrative methods, but also aims to lay the foundation for future history, hoping to provide new perspectives for contemporary social change. This book has attracted attention from all walks of life since its publication, and of course, there are also critical voices. However, Graeber has always been a sledgehammer in academia. He often proposes heretical views and collides with traditional mainstream concepts. Therefore, the best way to read this book is not to simply accept everything, but to bring our existing knowledge to collide with the viewpoints they propose and open up our own imagination. This is also one of the purposes of the book's authors, to bring some shock from our ancestors to us modern people who are gradually losing our imagination, and to get more people to start thinking about whether there might be better solutions to the problems encountered in modern society. There are many subversive views in the book, and a few particularly noteworthy ones are worth our attention. Let's look at them one by one. First, let's see how this book disassembles the Homo sapiens paradox, which is, since humans already had brains similar to today's about hundreds of thousands of years ago, why did it take until about 10,000 years ago for complex human behavior to emerge? Then let's look at the agricultural revolution as the origin of civilization, and this book also offers a new explanation. Finally, let's see what kind of new cognitive framework the authors propose on the basis of a new understanding of history. Did humans really take tens of thousands of years to create complex societies? In many books, not only the grand history bestsellers mentioned earlier, but also including the famous political scientist Francis Fukuyama's The Origins of Political Order, you will hear similar statements. About 500,000 years ago, after the emergence of the Homo sapiens species, although our ancestors had brains as developed as today, these primitive people had not yet broken away from nature, engaging in hunting and gathering, and the gap between humans and animals was not very big. Until between 15,000 BC and 5,000 BC, humans gradually learned to use polished stone tools, which is the Neolithic age, and those behaviors representing human uniqueness suddenly emerged, such as rituals, burials, art, etc., and then agriculture. Suddenly emerged, ancestors had more than enough to eat, population differentiation occurred, and thus they stepped towards civilization. In response to this framework we are so familiar with, the book's question is very simple. Why did it take so long from when we were capable of creating culture to when we finally began to create culture? Why did Homo sapiens take tens of thousands of years to realize the pursuit of beauty, to start worshipping supernatural forces, to discover that they could plant plants? Traditionally, this series of questions is known as the Homo sapiens paradox. Why did Homo sapiens have brains for tens of thousands of years but just didn't use them? Of course, we already know that, whether from the living conditions of modern hunter-gatherer groups or from archaeological evidence, the lives of hunter-gatherers are not entirely as previously imagined, with no food for the next meal. On the contrary, anthropologists have even come up with a new term called the original affluent society. We already know that in early human hunter-gatherer societies, except for the relatively common early deaths of children lowering the average lifespan, most individuals can grow to around 60 years old, and compared to individuals in agricultural societies, hunter-gatherers, because of their higher food diversity, can eat different things every season and even every day, with few individuals suffering from malnutrition, and their average height is also higher. In short, without agriculture, humans can basically meet their food and clothing needs, and have the conditions to create some complex issues. In fact, with more and more archaeological evidence unearthed, we will find that the premise of the Homo sapiens paradox itself may be wrong. In fact, humans have been doing what humans do from the beginning. As early as the Paleolithic age, humans developed complex cultural behaviors. For example, in recent years, the newly excavated Sungir site in Russia has found exquisite burials, dating back about 30,000 years. In these burials, there are many small beads made from mammoth ivory and fox teeth, which may be decorations for clothing and are estimated to require 10,000 man-hours to produce. Moreover, different individual burials have different burial forms, such as in the burials of two children. Their clothes are obviously more luxurious, and there are two long spears made from straightened mammoth tusks, indicating their higher status. Coincidentally, many early human burial sites have been found in Europe, where we can see a large investment in burial objects, highly standardized production methods, rare materials from far away, and different levels of burials. Moreover, in southeastern Turkey, Göbekli Tepe, a group of megalithic stone structures dating back to around 9000 BC, were unearthed. Some pillars are about 5 meters high and weigh up to 1 ton, which is the earliest discovered stone circle. There are more than 200 of these pillars, each a unique work of art, either with complex reliefs or as sculptures in the shape of a human figure. In Eastern Europe, from 25,000 to 12,000 years ago, archaeologists have also discovered many complex circular architectural structures over a wide area. On these frameworks made of dozens of mammoth teeth and bones and ivory are alternately arranged in different sequences and styles, with the largest diameter reaching 12 meters. According to research, the construction of such large-scale buildings required mammoths enough for hundreds of people to eat for about 3 months, and it is likely to be a memorial building for large-scale mammoth hunting, while also serving as a trading center for exchanging amber, shells, and animal furs from afar. These seem to indicate that these human communities that had not yet learned to farm already had concepts of status and power found in complex societies. So based on this understanding, can we reverse and say that the earliest human community forms were not primitive, egalitarian small groups, but established monarchies and hereditary power and other hierarchical systems from the beginning? Yes and no. Because scholars have also found that the scope of these complex relics is very scattered, and the duration of activity is not very long. In a larger geographical range, there are still many simple groups. So how to explain the existence of these complex relics? In fact, the answer given by this book is that in the tens of thousands of years before the so-called civilized era, early humans did not learn those complex arts, hierarchical societies, and so on, but did them sometimes and sometimes not. According to seasonal changes with great flexibility, also known as seasonality. The basic starting point here is that early humans also used their brains, and they understood how to adapt to local conditions and times. This kind of seasonal political arrangement can also be seen in modern hunter-gatherer societies, such as the Inuit in North America and the Nambikwara in Brazil. Here, we take the Nambikwara as a typical case. The Nambikwara live in an infertile grassland. Although they are not starving to death, there is no material accumulation, but even so, the Nambikwara still elect their chiefs. These chiefs help the Nambikwara transition between social forms in different seasons. How does this work? First, let's talk about the geographical background. In the grasslands where they live, there are mainly the rainy season and the dry season. In the rainy season, they live in villages in groups of hundreds, engaging in gardening, and in the dry season, they disperse and become foraging small nomadic groups. In the dry season, the chiefs are responsible for playing the hero, leading small groups to travel around the grasslands, such as whether to cross a turbulent river, whether to chase a group of animals, deciding the group's direction, and commanding members to do this and that. In the rainy season, when the chief's adventures in the grasslands are successful and they have accumulated enough prestige, they can attract people to live around their homes in the villages. At this time, although he is still a chief, he cannot forcibly command others, but can only persuade and set an example, and at the same time, he is responsible for distributing resources, easily becoming the poorest person in the village. In other words, in the dry season, they are like kings, and in the rainy season, they are just special individuals who mediate conflicts and distribute resources in an egalitarian village. These people have full political awareness and know when it is more appropriate to do what. According to the research of the famous anthropologist Levi Strauss in the 1940s, these chiefs are different from most of their companions, purely enjoying prestige itself, feeling a strong sense of responsibility, and for them, undertaking public affairs itself will bring rewards. He believes that these chiefs, like some politicians in modern society, know how to balance personal ambition and public interest, and can enhance the adaptability of the group in times of material scarcity and help ensure equal social order when materials are abundant. Introducing seasonality makes the coexistence of the previously mentioned scattered luxurious relics and simple foraging groups much easier to understand. Whether it is the stone circle of Göbekli Tepe or the mammoth ivory buildings in Eastern Europe, they are actually the relics of large settlements that appeared after a brief period of material abundance, following a big harvest or big hunt in a certain season, and at other times, the residents here will disperse and become small groups engaged in hunting and gathering in the surrounding areas. Archaeologists now speculate that the community that built the Stonehenge in England thousands of years ago was such a pendulum society. These people would mainly eat acorns and raise pigs and cattle, and in winter they would concentrate on slaughtering and eating. At some important moment in the year, such as the winter solstice, they would gather from all corners of the British Isles on the plains in southern England, enjoying big fish and meat, and building large ceremonial buildings with wood and stone. So some places are large villages of thousands of people in winter and deserted wastelands in summer. And the most famous Stonehenge now is actually the last of a series of memorial buildings, and many earlier stone circles and wooden circles were dismantled after being built for a period of time. However, unlike the Nambikwara, they are richer in material in winter and may develop leader roles, similar to kings, to coordinate long-distance transportation of stone materials and construction of buildings, while living a more egalitarian life in summer. And those who appear to be more noble in ancient tombs may have been people who played important roles in different seasons. In fact, this pendulum society with seasonality has also left some traces, such as many ancient festivals that have celebrations that reverse the daily social order, such as Halloween in the West and the Lantern Festival in ancient China, allowing people to temporarily break the original social taboos and revel without, sometimes also building short-term, ceremonial facilities, such as some places in South China that dance fire dragons during the Mid-Autumn Festival, or burn exquisite paper effigy gods during worship. Sometimes, heroes or leader-like figures are elected during festival celebrations, such as the familiar dragon boat races and flower snatching, and the special status of the winners only lasts until the next celebration. In summary, over the long tens of thousands of years, Homo sapiens did not fail to invent complex societies that include characteristics such as rituals, art, and status, but only chose a certain form when needed, with obvious seasonality, and some seasons of society have the rudiments of civilization in the general sense. This seasonality means that humans will switch between different social structures with strong flexibility because humans have always been a species that constantly changes their organizational forms to adapt to changes. But we also know that later on, complex societies that do not change with the seasons did appear, that is, the narrow sense of civilization that has moved away from barbarism. So what happened? Is the origin of civilization the agricultural revolution? To answer the previous question, let's review a classic term, the agricultural revolution. We often think that during the Neolithic Age, Homo sapiens around the world gradually discovered that they could actively concentrate on planting certain plants and select individuals more suitable for their collection, that is, domestication, such as a mutation in the ear of a wheat plant. The grain does not naturally fall off, but needs to be harvested and planted by humans, so agriculture was born. Based on agriculture, humans began to settle, build cities, and status differentiation appeared. Humans bid farewell to barbarism, and early civilization and states were born, which is the agricultural revolution. But as for how agriculture actually appeared, scholars are still divided. And the most basic question is, why would the earliest farmers want to grow food that they couldn't use up at all? Remember the friends who mentioned in the previous part that hunter-gatherer societies have more balanced nutrition may further ask, why didn't humans give up agriculture after the quality of life in the agricultural age decreased? This book, through updated archaeological evidence, not only explains the origin of agriculture, but also argues that there was no one-time agricultural revolution in history. Humans did not suddenly turn to agriculture, but, like adjusting social structures in different seasons, changed production methods in different seasons, and there have been phenomena of giving up agriculture all over the world. Let's talk about the origin of agriculture, called playing with planting. Yes, not because of not being able to eat enough, but playing with planting, that is, only regarding farming as one of the choices to provide a variety of foods, rather than pinning all hopes of filling their stomachs on farming. The evidence is not elsewhere, but in one of the recognized earliest origins of agriculture, the Fertile Crescent in West Asia. This Fertile Crescent includes the fertile area composed of the eastern Mediterranean coast and the famous Tigris-Euphrates river system. The Göbekli Tepe mound we mentioned earlier is on the edge of this zone. According to decades of excavations by archaeologists, they have accumulated a batch of early agricultural data in the Fertile Crescent, comparing the size of grains and the proportion of arable weeds to study the relationship between cultivation and domestication. Archaeologists have found that before ancient humans domesticated plants, they would do some behaviors similar to cultivation for their preferred plants, such as turning the soil and removing weeds to make them bear larger fruits. And according to these data, there are 3,000 years between the beginning of human cultivation and the domestication of these plants. What's even stranger is that researchers have tried to domesticate wild crops under experimental conditions and found that domestication doesn't take that long. As long as the most primitive harvesting method is used, that is, waiting for the crops to start maturing and harvesting with a stone knife, cutting the grains and stems together, and then scattering new seeds on the ground, it is enough to disrupt the natural selection pattern of plants. In the shortest, a few decades, and at most only 200 years, traits affecting natural reproduction will appear, such as grains no longer naturally falling off and having to be sown artificially. And according to archaeological research, humans in the Fertile Crescent had been widely using straw to strengthen the strength of soil houses before they took grains as the staple food. In other words, humans have been harvesting grains for a long time, but the main harvest was straw, not food. Since it can be achieved so easily, why did humans take 10 times as long? According to the author's explanation, humans at that time were more inclined to effortlessly play with planting, moving in and out between agriculture and other forms of production, rather than fixing on one method. Especially, the land for agriculture is actually not the most fertile and richest in natural resources in nature. These places belong to thriving natural vegetation and are the paradise of foragers' favorite food. On the contrary, agriculture can only exist as a supplementary option in more marginal areas. From archaeological research, we will find that there are more than 10 independent origins of agriculture in the world, and humans in various places have tried planting according to local unique plants many times, but none have completed domestication quickly. For example, as early as 7000 BC, Mexico had domesticated pumpkins and corn, and it took another 5,000 years for these crops to become local staples. In northern China, there was a small-scale cultivation of millet in 8000 BC, but it took another 3,000 years for grain farming to become popular in the Yellow River Basin, and the rice in the Yangtze River Basin took 1,500 years to complete the process from cultivation to domestication. Even from the perspective of historians, this is too slow to be called a revolution. This is because the expansion of agriculture is actually a process of reclaiming wasteland by humans, full of risks, so there are indeed groups that give up agriculture after accepting it, only regarding agriculture as one of the options. Simple agriculture not only poses health risks to individuals, such as malnutrition caused by a single food source, and an increase in cavities due to a high proportion of carbohydrates, but it may also threaten the community as a whole. The most classic case is the Central European farmers around 5500 BC, who immigrated from the Fertile Crescent into Central Europe, avoiding the prosperous hunting and gathering societies along the European coast, and successfully took root in the previously uninhabited European hinterland with agricultural technology. However, after a period of rapid population growth, the local population experienced a catastrophic decline between 5000 BC and 4500 BC, leaving behind mass graves and traces of war. One of the main reasons is that local societies rely solely on a single crop and are very vulnerable in the face of disasters. A similar situation also appeared in the previously mentioned builders of Stonehenge in England, who originally engaged in agricultural farming on the European continent, but abandoned agriculture when they crossed the sea to England, choosing seasonal animal husbandry and hunting and gathering. In other words, the initial expansion of agriculture was just an experiment, not as the basis for large-scale change. On the contrary, early farmers on each continent expanded agriculture in relatively resource-poor areas, and easily chose the so-called low-level food production again after weighing the pros and cons, which is consistent with the principle of flexibility of seasonal societies. A brand new hypothesis on the origin of the state. Speaking of this, we have broken several traditional concepts of the origin of civilization, and now we can establish them. The authors propose three principles of domination, which are violent control, information control, and personal charisma, to describe the basis of power in human society. Violent control and personal charisma are more direct and easy to understand. And this information control can actually be called knowledge monopoly, that is, establishing hierarchy according to the knowledge owned, which may be specific technical knowledge, such as knowing how to use herbal medicine, or it may be strange jargon, such as internet slang. These three can become institutional arrangements, with violence corresponding to sovereignty, which is the system of forcing members to obey management within a certain territory through violence. Information control corresponds to administrative management or mysticism, establishing a hierarchical system by mastering complex knowledge. Personal charisma is heroic politics, allowing a few elites to accumulate prestige through certain activities and compete with each other. Mastering one of them can be called a first-order civilization, and within this new epistemology, we will find all kinds of early civilizations. For example, is there a complex society that only understands violence, does not understand knowledge, and does not have charismatic leaders? Yes, there is the Natchez culture in America, a large village with thousands of people, one of which has a chief called the Great Sun, who is considered a descendant of the sun god. He makes laws and holds ceremonies for the Natchez people, but at the same time, he has the power to do whatever he wants within the range of the large village. On the one hand, he issues decrees prohibiting theft and murder, but on the other hand, he can arbitrarily execute Natchez subjects and confiscate their property at will. This is actually simulating a god transcending good and evil, because only by being above good and evil can one decide what is good and evil. And if the Natchez people leave the large village where the Great Sun lives, his violent restraint immediately loses effect. Is there a first-order civilization that only controls knowledge? There is also the Chavin culture circle in South America. There are no barracks or palaces in Chavin ruins, but a narrow maze engraved with mysterious patterns. These mysterious patterns are very popular, but they are not grand large-scale secular patterns that can be seen at a glance, but are likely related to shamanic culture. Many patterns depict male figures with sharp teeth and snake-shaped headdresses, holding plants that can cause hallucinations, and then taking them to produce countless wonderful hallucinations. Various animals and human figures are mixed together to form abstract and complex patterns that only trained clergy can read. For hundreds of years, Chavin has been a common pilgrimage destination for a large area of scattered people, accepting divine revelations given by shamans. Can a civilization be established with only charisma? There is also an example from America, the Olmecs, the cultural ancestors of the Maya and Aztecs, who appeared in Central America between 1500 BC and 1000 BC. They invented hieroglyphic writing, an accurate solar calendar, and a ball game that spread to later generations. According to the urban ruins of the Maya and Aztecs, scholars speculate that the Olmec ball game may be played on a long and narrow court, with noble-born players divided into two teams, only using their hips and buttocks to hit a rubber ball, and the winning side can gain fame and status. This ball game is also an important part of mythology, and the Maya people believe that human heroes and gods from the underworld compete on the court, and after the hero defeats the god, he can become a god. The Olmecs like to sculpt a kind of giant round stone carving heads, and scholars now speculate that they may be the image of the ball game champion. The Olmecs do not have a stable military or administrative structure, but they have a long-term cultural influence in a large geographical range, and it is likely that by holding ball games at certain agricultural times, they gather people from all over the place to a certain court, forming a short-term seasonal theater state. If you want to go further and become a second-order civilization that is proficient in two, you will find their social forms are much more familiar. In fact, second-order civilizations generally use three forms of dominion power, but only two of them are institutionalized, and the other may be highly abstract. For example, China's Shang dynasty is a complex second-order civilization with developed information control and charismatic politics, that is, divination and foreign wars, but it does not emphasize the declaration of territorial sovereignty. Divination needs no further explanation, as the nobility will ask for divination for everything, which is a typical form of knowledge control. Although the Shang dynasty also exerts violence on the slaves under its rule, what we see more easily is that the rulers of the Shang dynasty periodically launch wars to seize prisoners of war and slaves, and after success, they celebrate greatly, including human sacrifices. In the author's view, this violence is more like a competitive game in heroic politics, consolidating their charismatic power by humiliating opponents of surrounding regimes. However, the Shang dynasty is just one of the many surrounding regimes, and its control weakens greatly after leaving the capital, and their declaration of sovereignty over the surroundings is only at the abstract level, calling themselves the center of the four directions, as a hub for communication between heaven and humans. In modern states, there are basically developed three forms of dominion power: strong standing armies and police, bureaucratic systems full of various regulations, and ritualized heroic politics. You may ask, what is modern heroic politics? A counterexample might be easier to understand. Without heroic politics, major decisions, major celebrations, and other occasions should be decided by drawing lots to select the person in charge, which is common in many ancient civilizations. Whether it is a first-order or a third-order civilization, as long as it has mastered the power of domination, it has to give up more or less the flexibility we mentioned earlier. This actually explains why many groups have not entered the civilization stage for a long time, and many human communities still maintain seasonal rhythmic changes until modern times, deliberately avoiding agriculture that would lose leisure, and avoiding being dominated by others in civilization. Conclusion: what have we lost? Well, we can also summarize the doubts at the beginning of this book in the end. What has humanity lost by getting to where we are today? The author's final answer is that humans have become less and less free, and they propose that the ancients had three freedoms, which are the freedom to leave their environment, the freedom to ignore or disobey others' orders, and the freedom to shape a new social reality or switch between different social realities. Indeed, compared to the seasonal societies of our ancestors, modern people can only choose a two-point frontline life. It is precisely because of these freedoms that humans have maintained a high degree of diversity over tens of thousands of years, and these three freedoms basically no longer exist in modern society, replaced by the developed three forms of domination. But if I were to answer what humanity has lost, my answer would be flexibility and imagination. Modern society has created huge material wealth today, which is undoubtedly successful, but this is also a misunderstanding that many grand history books are prone to. Just because this path has been taken does not mean that only this path can be taken, and we need to consider other possibilities. Especially in the past 300 years, the rapid expansion of modern civilization that first appeared in Europe has led to the extinction of many unique cultures and has made many people forget the imagination that humans originally possessed. One of the main reasons Graeber and Wingro wrote this book, as mentioned in the book, is that most people rarely think about looking at human history in general. They won't think about it for no reason unless they are reflecting on why the world seems so chaotic, why humans often treat each other maliciously, or what has led to war, greed, exploitation, and systematic indifference to the suffering of others. Have we always been like this, or have we taken a wrong turn at some point? From the perspective of this book, re-understanding human history in this way is also looking for new possibilities for the future of humanity.